of many of the historical phenomena which occur in the world and the types of people which exist. How do we go about answering the first three questions? What we did was we drew a chronological history, and we said that fundamentally, and I'm going to just a review, a quick review. I'm not going to really belabor the point. It's going to be a quick review with Adam Rishon. History starts off with Adam Rishon. What was Adam Rishon? Essentially, Adam Rishon was a certain kind of barrier, a certain kind of being, who was created for one specific tachlis. That tachlis which he was created for was that Adam should be mashlim the bria, or olam hazeh, through his maisim, given a certain shlemus, and we went into to some degree what that means. It's to mezachis the bria, to elevate the bria to a level of kedusha, and we had many shiurim on what that concept of zich was, that concept of kedusha, and so on. But essentially, what the purpose of Adam Rishon was to establish the matzah called Olam Haba. That was the tachlis of Adam Rishon. Adam Rishon failed to establish that tachlis. He failed to establish that tachlis. So what happened was, the Midas Hadin said basically, since he failed to establish the original tachlis, that thing, let's get rid of Adam Rishon. Adam Rishon is nidun le'ibud, essentially. The din knows no qualms. Din is only concerned with one concept, that person cannot get that which he has not earned. Tikkun of Nam Tzufa. And din runs by the Tikkun of Nam Tzufa. There is no such thing as Rachmanos and din. Din serves the equation. Whatever you add to one side of the equation, you must add to the other. It's not concerned with failure or inequalities. But what the Bonishim did, alternatively, the Midas, what we call Rachmanos, or what we call the Midas HaYichud, or the Hanogas HaYichud, he established a different thing. The Bonishim says, wait a minute, let's keep this tachlis of Olam Haba, but let's change the role a little bit, you see. And instead of Adam doing it, let's now establish the Toldus of Adam, and then his Toldus establish this kind of thing. So what we have in the next generation are the Toldus of Adam Rishon. Adam Rishon. Their tachlis was essentially a similar thing, was again to Mekadosh the Bria, Mezach the Bria, and establish the Madrega called Olam Haba. This was true up to a certain point in history. Up until approximately the time of Avram. The ages are not exact, and I'm not concerned with technical accuracy here, because there are a lot of things involved. We just want to get the general flow of the process. By the time Avram Avinu came upon the scene, the Midas Hadin had already been mekatrig on all the world, and said, look, this is not going to work, because all the people of the world do not have the maisim, which can create the minimum madrega of Olam Haba. Remember, Olam Haba is a certain level of zicha, of kedusha. You see, in order to create that thing, you got to have the minimum amount of kedusha or koichet of toiv. If you fail to do it because of your maitam, then you cannot establish the minimum level of Olam Haba. Hence, you cannot establish anything. And when the Bonishim looked over the world in terms of the Midas Hadin, the Kittig, the Sultan said, was mekatig, and says, look, there's no way that they're going to achieve it. Hence, it was a tremendous dilemma. So what the Bonishim said was the following: I now will design the situation according to a different way. But the Bonishim laid down a plan or a scheme. It did not become an actual. He did not implement it yet until later on. What was laid down in terms of a scheme or in its theoretical possibilities. You see, essentially this was theoretical. You see, was that one man was chosen from all the Ummah Olam. Why? Because that man was a tzaddik. That man on his own could establish the aspect of Olam Haba. But if that's not what he could have, in a sense, but that wasn't his tachlis. After Adam Rishon, no man ever again had the power to establish Olam Haba on his own, in terms of that koyach. But that person who was Avram Avinu, you see, was a very big tzaddik, and Avram was able to establish that tachlis. So, Avram himself would have been Zoichet Olam Haba. That's why it was called an Ivri. The entire world was on one side, he was on the other. What does that mean? The entire world was on one side in respect to Olam Haba, that they would no longer have Olam Haba, or at least they couldn't aspire to it. And Avram was on the other side, he's called an Ivri, an Ava, on the other side, you see, and he was able to establish that. So what the Banishim told Avram was this, and a new plan was conceived, something that never happened in the Bria before. What the Banishim said to Avram, he said like this, he said, since you are a tzaddik, I'm going to separate and isolate you from all of mankind. And I'm going to create for the first time, such a thing has never happened, but for the first time, I'm going to differentiate mankind into two different species. The two species will be the following. Your zera, the ones that come from you, will retain the tachlis of Olam Haba. He told us about Avram Avinu, would retain the tachlis of Olam Haba. You see, they would be given the equipment, the wherewithal, in terms of the koyach ha-nefesh, which is necessary to establish that state of zichor. Everybody else will no longer have that. They will be excluded from that because they don't have that. They don't have that. Now, what we said was a very critical thing. And this was a tremendous zach. I mean, you have to realize that for such a din to come in the Bria is a very, very difficult thing. Because in effect what it's saying is that a tremendous part of mankind now is shut out from what originally used to be the tachlis of the Bria. Well, now, what would happen to this aspect of mankind? We'll go on in a second. What happened to that rest of them? But what the Banishim said is, in you will all the nations be blessed. Why? Because in you will be the koyach to be mazach the Bria, to establish the tachlis which I originally intended, which is my atava, to be made of the Bria, and that's a madrega of Olam Haba. You see, in you, in no one else. However, the Banishim did not implement that as of yet. He did not do that. He simply forewarned Avram such a promise, and he didn't do it yet. What? Because the rest of the world, even though at that point they were not Zoichet Olam Haba, they still had the possibility of gaining it. They weren't shut out yet. When were they finally shut out? By Matan Torah. What happened was, there's a medrash that says that the Banishim went around to all the Muslim and offered the Torah. What essentially the Banishim did, in his way, which we will not go into, but in some way, the Banishim was communicated with the ruchnius of every ummah in its inner pneumius in some way, and said, look, do you wish to establish the Chelik of Adam Rishon, establish the Inyan of Olam Haba, or not? And they said, well, how do you establish this kind of thing? So the Banishim said, the following are the ways that you have to establish it. For example, he went to Esav and he said to Esav, Lo Sitzach. They said, I'm sorry, we can't abide by that. I think he went to Yishmael and they said, Lo Signoy, we can't abide by that, and so on. All the Ummah Sa'olam at that time rejected it. And they said, we cannot abide by these conditions. We are not interested in this particular kind of objective that you have. So at that point, what the Banishim was decided two things at Matan Torah. One, that the world had descended to a certain level. And what the Banishim said was that in order to establish the Inyan of Olam Haba, you have to Mekayim Tayag Mitzvahs. That was the Chiddush, one of the Chiddushim of Matan Torah. The Chiddush of Matan Torah was that the vehicle of Olam Haba was now in the form of Tayag Mitzvahs. The vehicle of Olam Haba was not in the form of Tayag Mitzvahs before, because Adam Rishon only had one mitzvah. And Noach, Neshiv Mitzvah, Noach down, or whatever it was, had 7 mitzvahs. However you want to look at it. The concept of Tayag came into being at the time of Matan Torah. That this is the way that you would have to be mashed in the Bria, through the Tayag Mitzvahs. The tikkun of Nam Neksufa must be through the Tayag Mitzvahs. But he offered this concept of this instrumentation of Tayag Mitzvahs for all the peoples of the world. They all turned it down, except for Klal Yisrael and one other exception. If you go into that's a whole other thing itself. What? The Erev. Yeah.
What is the different characteristics between Tayag Mitzvahs and Shavuot Mitzvahs?
Are you familiar with the Shavuot Mitzvahs? Are you familiar with the actual they're different. The Tayag Mitzvahs are much lengthy, but the Shavuot Mitzvah Noach fundamentally concern themselves with the societal behavior of man, in terms of thievery, in terms of homicide, in terms of establishing courts of justice, belief in the Bnei Shalom, cruelty, profanation of the Bnei Shalom's name. These are essential things which mankind requires to be civilized, essentially, and the tikkun of the Bria lay in that. But the Tayag mitzvahs are, concerns much more. It concerns the many mitzvahs that are totally in Kodshim and Taras and Moed and
the seven mitzvahs are part of the Tayag mitzvahs, but the first mitzvah of Adam Rishon, is that also part of it?
Yeah, it all is part of it and so on. How it's part of it, it's a very difficult thing. The transformation of the mitzvahs, which is essentially what we're talking about, is a very, very important thing, and the transformation of the Torah into the more and more numerous mitzvahs has to do with the amount of tumah that enters the Bria. The more Chatoim go into the world, then all the Torah, or the capacity of the Kedusha, which in Torah becomes more and more hidden. And as the Torah becomes more and more hidden, it becomes proliferated more and more mitzvahs. The fact that we have Tayag mitzvahs is a hester, is a very big hester, and so on. And the thing is, and this has to do with the whole concept of the Mashiachin, that the fundamental tachlis of the Mashiachin, especially the Mashiach ben Yosef, is to take the Or HaTorah out of the Klippas. And that's what essentially what Moshe did and Lasset Lovoi. Essentially this is the thing, but that's a whole shmooze itself.
So is Tayag mitzvahs more of a responsibility, or it's just more specific?
It's more, in a certain sense, it's more responsibility. It's also more itemized and more specific. To say it's more difficult, I can't say that, because that has to do with the whole concept. The Yetzer himself changed in each Bria. We can't go into that. That's what's called the concept of the Gilui level of each door. Every generation is different. That's another concept. Leave that go. But the point is that, as far as we're concerned, after Matan Torah, the way to establish the Madreg of Olam Haba is through the Tayag mitzvahs. You cannot establish it another way. Before Matan Torah, you were able to establish it without that, up to a certain point. Okay. What we therefore see in Matan Torah is a very interesting thing. Everyone thinks that what was created in Matan Torah was the Jew, right? Am Yisrael, Klal Yisrael was formed at Matan Torah. That's what everyone thinks. True, right? No, it's not true. Klal Yisrael was not formed at Matan Torah. What was formed really at Matan Torah was the union of a guy. It's fakir. Why? Because essentially, what is a Jew? A Jew is nothing more than a person who retains the objective of Adam Rishon. That's what a Jew means. A Jew means a Yid, a Yisrael, however you want to call him, is simply an individual who has the koiches hanefesh to elevate the Bria to a madreg of Olam Haba. That's all it means to be a Yid. And in that respect, Adam Rishon was a Yid. In that respect, Avom. In that respect, all the Goyim, all the Umas before Matan Torah were Yidden. As long as they retain that koyach, they technically all were Yidden. So what happened was in Matan Torah is that they were shut off. They no longer had that koyach. So the concept of a goy was created. This is something which never existed before. That there should exist a min enushi, that there should exist a species of man who cannot affect a madreg of Olam Haba, and therefore not prescribe or not become involved in that objective, was never known in the Bria. Miyoim Iboroi, from the time it was created, such a zach never happened. You see. And hence what was created from the Toldos HaRavom was a split. It was called Yisrael, right? And what's called the Goy Oretz, or the Umas Olam.
Two short questions. One, what's the significance of just being a Hasra in making the implementation of Matan Torah?
Why was the double?
What significance is the line? Well,
there was a Hasra before, like Noach, there was 600 years before the mention of
How was the Hasra delivered?
What?
Was the Muslim aware of the Kibbutz?
That's a very... how was the Hasra delivered, number one? And then finally, how did the Boshim go to each Ummah and ask him and so on?
Well, the moral is that's to be metaphorical. That it's just mitzad also. It was Mashiach Chol Musadim. He saw.
There's a way it's delivered. They don't understand.
There doesn't have to be an actual literalist in it.
It's a delivery system. The way such a message is delivered to Ummah Yisrael has to do with the fundamental nature. It has to do with the nature of the Yetzer Hara and the nature of the Yetzer Torah. It's delivered to a certain through their balance and through the way they operate. But that has to do with another shir, how the delivery process works.
Well, okay.
Let's just see the sequence of events that take place. Yeah. Okay.
One short comment. Insofar as the general point that the phenomenon that came into being was Umas Ha'olam, insofar as they were excluded from being the Saknim of the Bria, on top of the Bria Seven, it was only retained by Klal Yisrael. It's valid. But I would say also that another phenomenon that came into being simultaneously and concurrent is the Metzias of the Ummah Yisrael as being the Masaknim, because it wasn't ipso facto as if they always had it. It was Al Yidei the Schia of Avraham Avinu. So the Ramchal said that they all could have been Shirashim at that time. Only Avraham was Zocha.
Yeah.
So with two themes were concurrent. One, the Ummah Yisrael started descending and became excluded from being Masaknim, or no Masaknim. And the Metzias of Goyim became a reality, as you're saying. And concurrent with that, the Metzias of Zerah Avram became Roy. They were the only Ummah that became Roy.
Okay.
I mean, it's two, you know what I mean?
Yeah, but you're running ahead. You're running
two things
ahead.
going down the same street.
Yeah, there's a lot of things going on the street, but no, really. About 50 things running down the street. I mean, if you really want to look at it, But we should only see really one individual at a time. That kind of a street. We'll get into that in a second. But the next question we have to deal with very quickly is, fine, we understand now what a Yisrael is. Well, what in heaven's name is an Umas Olam? Fine, we now know what a Goy is not. We know that a Goy, or all the Goyim of the world, are not. Do not have Shaykhs to Adam Rishon, fine, or the Tachas. But what do they have Shaykhs to then? You see? And very simply what we said last week was the following. That there's a Baita that says, in the Kol Yisrael Yechon Chelik L'Olam Haba. Every Yid has a Chelik L'Olam Haba. Now, this doesn't mean that every Yid has a destined Chelik L'Olam Haba, because he can lose it. What it means is that every Yid has a Koyach HaNefesh in him to establish a state of Shleimus in the world, Nach the Bria. He's got that Koyach. That Koyach comes through Bechira. He can fail to establish it and then do nothing. In that case, he doesn't have a Chelik L'Olam Haba. And the Mishnah enumerates it. There are people who don't have a chelik l'olam haba. Choyte macht es erwarten, do not have chalakim l'olam haba, and so on and so forth. And Mount Shinim, Mount Sikvo, and all these other people and so on, they don't have a chalakim l'olam haba. Okay. So it means that a Yid potentially can have a chelik l'olam haba, but he can lose it. But he's distinguished by the fact that he has the ability or the potential in that direction. If we were to construct a Baisa about Goyim, it would be constructed so. Kol Goyim Ha'oretz, Kol Umas Olam, Yesh Lehem Chelik V'olam Hazeh. That's where we are. But the Midas Adin was a staggering thing. The Midas Adin took away the possibility of Olam Haba as the Atova and said, let's reinstate instead the Inyan of Olam Hazeh. This is where their Mokum Eden and Mokum Atova is. This is where it is. Now you might say to me, what's the raya for this? What's the raya that Olam Hazeh is where they're supposed to be? The fundamental raya that you see where it's supposed to be, that it is a Hatova, because we know the fundamental thing about the Bonisham, that the Bonisham does not give a Hatova, right, without earning it. That's the nature of a Hatova. You see, he can do other things, that are above Bechira, but when it comes to being Meitiv must always go through the Tikkun of Sufa. So, the Shaila is, obviously, if this is a Hatova that Goya, they must in some way earn it too. Where did they earn it? They must still keep the Shivmitz B'nai Noach. They still have to keep it. So the Bonisham made this tonight. Look, I will give you Olam Hazeh, but you must keep the Shivmitz B'nai Noach. If you fail to keep the Shivmitz B'nai Noach, then you will get nothing. You will be then destroyed entirely. If you keep the Shivmitz B'nai Noach, like a Ger Tosha, for example, you see, where you can live in Eretz Yisrael and you respect it. Ger Tosha was respected by the Am Yisrael. They were very chashuvim, Ger Tosha. They were going, but they were chashuvim. Then the Bonisham says, you will be made of, you will have tremendous hatzlacha in Olam Hazeh. That's what the Bonisham says. But you must do it al yidei schus. That shows you that it's a hatova. Now, what kind of hatova is? How can you switch one hatova for another from Olam Haba to Olam Hazeh? That's something else. There are other factors here involved also. But there is no question that it's an hatova. And that's what I said last week, a very critical thing.
It's not Tikkun Namik
What?
It's not Tikkun Namik Sufa.
It is a Tikkun Namik Sufa by Shiva Mitzvahs. What I said also last week is a critical point. When a Goy is Mekayim, all the Shiva Mitzvah Noach, Kedin, he's called a Tzaddik. Because what's a Tzaddik? A Tzaddik is someone who does what he has to. That's a Tzaddik. So a Tzaddik of a Goy, if a Goy is an emes of Tzaddik in a sense that he keeps the mitzvahs in a basic way, he's Zuichat to tremendous Hatzlacha in Olam Hazeh. You see, if a Yid is a Tzaddik, that he keeps Tayyik mitzvahs, then he's Zuichat to Chelik in Olam Haba. But what happens if a Yid keeps more than the mitzvahs of Taryag mitzvahs? He does it l'fnei Rishus Hadin. The Yid is called a chassid. What happens to Zolim Haba? It gets bigger. What? The same concept applies to a goy. What happens if the goy is a chassid? It means that he keeps the tshuva mitzvah neach, and he's a murdig mensch, and he's mative to the briyas also. And b'chlal, he brings a certain amount of hatzlocha. He brings a tov in the bria. He even brings a certain amount of kedusha. What happens to a goy? That goy can achieve olam haba, which is an amazing thing, which is an incredible thing, that the chesed of the Bnei Shalom remains to the end. That even though the Mekatik ran up and said to the Bnei Shalom, what are you doing with Yumas Olam? That shall no shaykh to Olam Haba. And the Bnei Shalom says, you're correct, you're right in terms of the din, but the Bnei Shalom says, so therefore, let's take it away from them and give them the Hatova in Olam Hazeh. But the Bnei Shalom said, but Afal Pikein, if they're Hasidim, that's why the Rambam says, Hasidim Yumas Olam, then they still can get Olam Haba, even as a goy. And that's why there is no mitzvah for a Yid to makar a goy to Yiddishkeit. Because the truth of the matter is, a goy can also be zoichet to Olam Haba. As a goy. The goyim, however, do not bestow on us that same kind of benefit. Because according to the goyim, if Jews do not convert to their religion, we're doomed to everlasting perdition. You see. But this is the key distinction. But there's something else. It is possible the Bnei Shalom also left open by Matan Torah another thing. Therefore, at Matan Torah, the Bnei Shalom established the nature or the mahus of a goy, that he's a ben olam hazeh who can yet still get olam haba. Now, but that olam haba that he gets to the goy could never equal the olam haba of a yid, because it just lacks the entire koyach. But the Bnei Shalom left even one more door open, and that door is gerus. That if the goy is megaya, if the goy converts, if the goy is megaya, if he converts, he can still get olam haba as a yid. So therefore, the Bnei Shalom was meschasid with the Ummah Olam on two different madregas. You see, even though the din, the mekatig, would rather do away with them entirely. Okay, so we have some kind of an understanding of Yisrael. We now have a basic understanding of a goy. Now we can answer some of the questions that we asked before. Okay, the first question, for example, we said, how is it, for example, that most of the world had never heard of Torah and all these things? The answer, in a chanami, because it's not their chelek. If you work in a certain job, right, you got to do a certain job. That which is not your job, you don't get any training on. It's as simple as that. You're not involved in it. If your job is in the bookkeeping department, they're not going to take you. You see, I put you in the personnel department. It's the same thing. Goyim are functionaries in Olam Hazeh. This is where they are. When you see a goy having a great time in Olam Hazeh, the truth is you're merachim on him in a sense. And he says, or you're merachim, and says, well, what he's doing is shtusim, is narishkeit, or whatever the story is. It is true from an absolute standpoint. But the fundamental point is, this is his chilek. This is his chilek. The Bnei Shalom wants him, not really, because the Bnei Shalom would rather really have him go to Olam Haba. But if he chooses this level of atava, that's his chilek. You see. So therefore, the answer to that is that most of the goyim of the world have no shaykhs to Olam Haba. So therefore, they have no shaykhs to Taryag mitzvahs. It's not their chilek. That's why they never heard of it. It's not an accident. The second question that we asked, how is it possible that there's such incredible achzoyas, for example, where you find, let's say, the Japanese and all these Ummah Olam, there's tremendous achzoyas. What shaykhs do they have to other Mauritians? And the answer is, they don't anymore. That's why they're capable of all this kind of thing. Because they don't have the same nefesh anymore. And this comes on to the next critical principle, which we all spoke last week.
They have neshamas?
What?
Do they have neshamas?
Yeah, nefoshes, yeah, they do. But not the same as a yid, because they don't have the koyach. And this is what I wanted to get to, a very critical principle in Ruchnius, a very critical point. Actually, maybe... let me put that point aside for 1 second, because to get to that point, I'll have to get to another. Let me put that point aside and just answer the third question. We saw that the tachlis of the Bria was that the Bnei Shalom did not want there to be a distinction between Jew and Goy. Right? Is that true? Yes, it is. Why? Because the Bnei Shalom would much rather have everyone to be shaykh to Olam Haba. The Bnei Shalom doesn't want people to be shaykh to Olam Hazeh. You see? The Buddhism wasn't concerned, you see, but I rephrased the question differently as to produce the problem. I said before, we see in the Torah that the Buddhism wants Yidden. But the truth of the matter is, and he doesn't want Goyim. But the truth of the matter is, what we see is that he doesn't want either. You see, he doesn't want either, because he didn't want Rodin Rishon either be a Yid or a Goy. That's how we thought in the beginning. But the way we understand it now, we see the answer. The Buddhism is not concerned with Yidden, and he's not concerned with Goyim. He's simply concerned with those beings who can Mekayim his tachlis, Mekayim his Atava, to be recipients of his Atava. Those people who can be recipients of his Atava are Shaykh to Elam Haba. That is fundamentally what a Yid is. So what the Buddhism wants a Ben Elam Haba. Right now, after Matan Torah, the only one who fit that bill was a Jew. He became a Ben Elam Haba. The Buddhism would not rather have a Ben Elam Haba. That's essentially the answer to that. So that answers the second question. In at least in that way. The third question that we had asked, and now we go back to that, is how is it shaykh for these going to have such cruelty if they come from such tzaddikim? And this comes to another very fundamental principle. This was theoretical over here. This was by Matan Torah. See, here it became actual. You see what I'm saying? What was implied then became actual. It is very important to understand a certain way that the Makatu can work. I'm going to erase this now, okay? Okay? The interesting book there was an interesting book from Tokyo to Jerusalem by Avram Kasuji. You get the book. It's a book there. Yeah, it's a story about a Japanese ger. You know how a guy in Japan was a Shinto. His father was a Shinto priest or something like that. Wound up to become a Frumma Yid. And if you want to understand why, read this book. What did he do good that somebody else didn't do? How come he was zeich to that path?
Yeah. There's
a number of questions.
There's one thing that you could say in that vein. The Shari simply says, Hashem the Chassam Sofer, Hashem the Rizal, and time out in Torah, the Riyachidim, the Masa'ilam, who responded positively. And they manifest themselves as Ger and Ger, so that's right history. That's one of the Buddha.
Because the truth of the matter is, the ones who respond, there are... Hold your question to later on, okay? Hold that question, okay? And that's a very good question. Hold that. We'll be able to explain that better as we get into other material shortly, okay? Okay. I'm not putting the question aside. It's a good one, but we lack the information necessary in which to really deal with that question intelligently. Okay?
Before I go to the next point, to clarify what we said before in regard to Tava business. Last week we came.
I want to clarify something else. Let me just clarify this. I'll get to this.
So this week we came to a different thought than last week.
No, let's clarify this point, and you'll bring up your point in a minute. When a person does certain chatoim, every person has a certain nefesh, right? Or a neshama. Okay? That neshama has a certain koyach. It has a certain koyach in kedusha. Okay? What does it mean? What does it mean that certain koyach in kedusha? I don't like to bandy on terms, and I want to give a certain kind of concrete understanding. It means very simply, a neshama is a being. It is an actual being. It exists, and it's a being, just like all of us in our group. Is a being, and this as a being, it has a body, but it's not a physical body. It has a structure. It has a certain kind of body. A body means that it's movable. The neshama is bounded in its substance in some way, so that it's separate from other aspects of reality, and that body, we use the word guf in a very general sense. You know what I mean? I don't mean really a guf like we have. Guf means really a bounded. Its substance is bounded so that it's distinguished from other aspects of reality. That's what we mean by a body.
It occupies space.
What?
It occupies space.
Not space, no. It occupies existence. It occupies existence. It's not necessarily space. We occupy space. That's not true of that. But what it is a neshama is a being which is composed of a certain substance. For example, these are composed of a substance. All of us are composed of a substance called geshem. You see, what is that substance called geshem? Well, essentially, the substance of geshem is composed of the 92 elements. all the 92 basic elements in the Mendeleev table and so on, put together, form all the chemical compounds of the Bria. And a person is nothing more than a different set of chemical compounds. That's essentially what he is. You can reduce the whole person down to a bunch of compounds. I think it's worth about $4.58, something like that. They once did that. I think it's maybe higher because of inflation. What? What's it? I don't know. I don't want to. It was like very cheap price. I don't know what it was. Something was really cheap. I think women were even cheaper.
Women should be more because they have 252 bones. We have 248.
Whatever the story is. Anyway, the point is, the geshem of the body itself is composed of the elements. That's what it is in all the chemical compounds. And essentially, it's carbon, hydrogen, and carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, and nitrogen. These are the key four elements and other mineral traces and so on. But you can list all the constituents of the human body and put it in a total list. You see, and that's essentially what the body is. The neshama is also composed of some substance. What is its substance? Its substance, whatever that is also has certain structure and function. But the substance is different than the substance of Geshem. In what way? In the sense that its substance is called ruchnius, spirit. What is the difference? It means it's pure. For example, it's pure, or its existence, or the way it exists, is on a pure plane. It exists on an existential plane, which is a higher level of purity. It's not as coarse. What does that mean? Well, we're not going to really go into that kind of sufficing intuitive understanding what that is. But that's what a neshama is. By virtue of its being or its substance, it possesses what's called kedusha. Kedusha is a property which describes or relates to the certain aspects of ruchnistic substances. The higher the ruchnistic substance that you're composed of, the higher corresponding kedusha. Kedusha is a variable which goes up and down depending on the substance of what you're composed of. That's why malachim, which are composed of a very pure substance, are more kaddish than normal malachim. The neshama happens to be tremendous in its kedusha. The neshama itself, in and of itself, is much higher in kedusha than a malach. Its substance is much higher than a malach. So it has that kedusha. It is that kind of kedusha which, when it acts on geshem, or on the substance of this particular plane, that can actually elevate it and purify it and elevate the entire thing up. It has that power. That's the power of that kedusha, and that resides in the being called neshama. And as the Tachlis that we said before, the neshama, when it goes into the guf through the mitzvahs by bringing down oris and reinforcing the neshama with its oris, it then has the capacity. It has the newfound ruchnius, and with that ruchnius, it can mazachas the guf or purify it, and it elevates it up to a madrega, which we call elam haba. That's very simply, again, what we've done. I'm repeating the theme over and over again because I cannot repeat the theme too much. That's fundamentally what the entire Bria is all about. Okay. When a person does a chet, what happens to this? When a person does a chet, you see, when he chooses against the Bnei Shalom in some specific way, and I'm not going to go into the nature of a chet at this point, but when he does a chet, what happens is he is then mizdabek or dovet to what's called tumah. What exactly is tumah? Tumah is another kind of substance, you see. But rather, it's a kind of substance which is far lower on the scale. And what it does is that when the person does a chet, the neshama becomes attached to this other substance on its surface called tumah or zoyama, you see. So what happens is, let's say the person does one chet, what happens is there is an attachment to a certain amount of tumah. You see that blue arc? That's a devekas, is dapkus of an attachment of a tumah to the neshama itself, to its being. It's like a scar or a scab. What does that do? That causes tremendous pain to the neshama. Why? Because it blocks the neshama from taking light or from ingesting its ore. You see. That's one of the things. Another thing is that this thing also serves as a parasite. And what it does, it takes in, it sucks in the oils of the neshama and robs it of its vitality. You know, for example, biologically, you know, I don't know if you know the tapeworm, the hookworm, tapeworm. Some of you ever know these worms? You know what the tapeworm is? You know, there's a certain worm. It's a worm which is it lives in the body. You see, it lives in the body. And what it is, it's very long. It's about 30 feet long. And what it is, it follows the entire tract or the cilia of the small intestine. And mama, the whole worm is in the small intestine, and it lives in the small intestine. And what it is, when a person keeps on eating, you see, and when the food is digested and then goes into the small intestine, instead of going to the bloodstream, whatever, the worm takes the food in itself. So the man finds himself losing weight the more and more he eats. You see. Now, there are a lot of people who would love that kind of a state. However, in this particular case, it is a very dangerous state, and if the tapeworm isn't taken out, the person could die. But it's that kind of a thing. One thing how they took out how to take out a tapeworm. What they do is they starve the man for like 4 or 5 days, so there's no food at all. Right? There's like no food at all coming into the system. And what they do is it's an astonishing thing. They put the person down on a table, whatever have you, and then the man opens up his mouth and they put some sugar or food at the beginning of his mouth, and you literally see the worm come out of the mouth, crawl out. What? It's a bait. But it's like the guy sees like a worm coming out of him. The experience must be staggering.
So they give the person like strong chemicals.
They could do that. In certain of them, they can like sometimes they have certain chemicals they can do it. In certain cases, I think they can't. Or that was before they had that. That's what they do. Whatever the story is.
Now we do it natural. Right?
What do you mean?
Natural. They bait him with sugar instead of giving him chemicals.
I don't know. Natural homeopathic medicine. In any case, this is the thing. So we have that's what the keeper does. It damages. It's a parasitic form that damages, that can actually damage the neshama. Now, that's what a keeper does. A keeper brings a klipa on the neshama. Now, how does the neshama get rid of that klipa? This is a very large subject, which is not our topic here, but the basic way that a neshama gets rid of that klipa is through what's called yisurim. Suffers and agonizes. The source that a person has removes these blotches and these scars. That's what it is, mamarek.
Yisurim shel ahava?
No, not ahava. Yisurim shel din.
Shel din?
Yeah, not ahava. Yisurim shel ahava is a totally different thing. Yisurim shel ahava is slabski, there's what's called a slabshus, where the neshama is surrounded, it's contained within the klipa, but the klipa is not attached to it. It just surrounds it, so it blocks the ore, but it cannot, it doesn't hurt the thing. It's a different kind of relationship. That's the kitten. Now, what happens is, the more person is chatoyim, obviously, the worse the blotches become. You see. Now, what happens is, when the blotch goes like this, we're in a lot of trouble. When the klipa is so powerful, when the person is mushba b'ra, and mushwash in ra, in his bechira, to such an extent where he's mamash a mudik rasha, and his mutla, then the klipa is incredibly dorik all around the neshama, and it holds it tight.
Is that what they call memte shara tumah?
But yeah, that's what happens when you go down the shara tumah. Exactly. That's exactly what happens. It's a very good point. The memte shara tumah, the 49 shara gates of tumah, that's exactly what you're going down. Now, when you're down to the memtes, you're in a lot of trouble. See. Now, what happens when you hit the 50th level? This is what happens. On the first 49 levels, if we want to say that, there is a dvekus, bara, over tumah. On the first 49, the neshama becomes dovek. What does that do? It doesn't affect the kedusha of the neshama in its panemius, but in its chitzonius, it does affect it. You see. But it doesn't affect the given kedusha of the substance of that neshama itself. On the 50th level, it already damages the panemius, and it alters the very substance of the neshama itself. And it could do that by the kittut that's established. When you're down, when a guy's down on the 49th, that's why it says there that Klal Yisrael was in the 49th thing, and had they stayed there a little longer, they would never been able to go out. What it means is the following, and we'll get into that in a second. This was the haftocha, which was given. We'll get into it in a second. What happened here was that when he goes on the 40th, goes on the 50th level, then the neshama changes its tzura, so that it is no longer a neshama on this thing, rather it is now a new nefesh, you see. The next effect is what's called a silik of kedusha. Silik means a withdrawal or a removal. That's the worst effect. Okay? There's a silik of kedusha. Now, if you establish this effect called a silik of kedusha, you see, what happens is, now you have a nefesh, right? Right? And now, you no longer have any kedusha at all. But you're down to the minimum forms of kedusha. Barely anything. We symbolize it, we put it in blue, you're down to almost nothing. Your substance already has been altered. So that the kochas and nefesh you have is totally different. You no longer could do what you could do up there. You're a different being. That is what happened to the goyim. It's very critical to understand this. What happened with the goyim was that they became so mushrish bara. There was a sidik of their kochas and nefesh. Their neshamas changed so that they have different nefashas. And that's why they no longer could become part of Olam Haba. You see. And this is where you think, when the Buddhism says, you no longer have Shaykhs Olam Haba, it's not the Buddhism doesn't say as a statement and therefore you have no longer. The Buddhism doesn't make statements. The Buddhism acts through existence. It means that you no longer have the being or the capacity of existence to enable you to establish Olam Haba. You lack being. You lack the kedusha or the kochas nefesh, which would be mazach severe. Hence, you are a different bria. This is a very critical thing to realize. This is what happened over there. Now, what happened was by Klal Yisrael, if Klal Yisrael had not gone out at that point, they would have gone out to the Nun Shari Tumah. What would have happened would have been this. They would have been altered from this to that. They would have transformed from the Ummah Yisraelis to one of the Ummahs Olam. That's what has happened. They would have become different, just like the Mitzrayim with them. Maybe not as bad, but they would have become another Ummah Sa'elim. Yes.
I mean, just semantically, we're neshamas and they're nefashas.
No, I don't. You mean semantically? The word. I don't want the word to be used in a precise fashion. They're not. We're all nefesh in itself. A nefesh in and of itself.
What did you say, Judge, with the Paul's washing? The neshamas are called to man.
No.
It says the neshamas are called to man.
Essentially, there are two aspects here. What goes on? There's what's called.
That's what he's saying.
A nefesh simply means that there's a nefesh. A nefesh is simply that which is in the person and which invigorates him in a certain extent. You can either have what's called a nefesh elyoina. A nefesh elyoina is a higher nefesh. That's like a neshama. And there's a nefesh of tachtoina, a lower form. So really, the general word semantically is the word nefesh.
The generic term.
Yeah, the generic term is nefesh. You see, a neshama refers to a certain type of nefesh which is very high. You see, there's also other kinds of nefashis, like a ruach. There's ruach, yechida, chaya. These are other lashonos that you all must heard. They are all nefashis, in the sense that they're all existential principles. You see, with certain substance differences. But all the substances that they have kedusha, which is very, very high. So therefore, they are all what's called nefashis elyonis. You see, the Ummah Olam dropped from a nefesh elyoina to a nefesh tachtoina, and therefore lost its inherent ability to establish Olam Haba. What does that mean? You see, again, we must get a hold on this in terms of relevance. What am I talking about? I'm talking about some fancy stuff that happened in the Shemaim. This is beyond our vision. We can't see the transformation, right? You look at the Goyim on Mount Torah. There was a man, there was the line. This was before Mount Torah, and this was after. Pre-Mount Torah, there was a certain second that was, at that point, was pre-Mount Torah and after Mount Torah, right? And suddenly, the man was a different person before and after. It was like Adam Rishon. Before he did that chet, he was Adam Rishon before the chet, with a certain level of substance, very high. Suddenly did the chet, he was a different bria. The same thing. Before Mount Torah, right before that couple of seconds, the last couple of seconds, you see, before Mount Torah, before the door was closed, you see, everyone had a certain nefesh elyoina. Suddenly, Mount Torah came on, and a certain juncture point came in. Suddenly, there was something called a ben olam hazeh. Now, what happens to a guy who's a ben olam hazeh? Let's make it. The man is standing over here, right? Okay, he's one of the guys. He's standing there, right? And in 5 seconds, something's going to happen to him. I want you to see it. This is not. I want you to concretize and realize that what really went on. There's a person standing here, right? And there's an interval of 5 seconds. In 5 seconds from now, he's about to become a ben olam hazeh. Now, what does that do for the guy? Is he aware of it? Yes. Sure. Is he aware of it? Of course he's aware of it. Was Adam Rishon aware that he was no longer the same before? Of course he was aware. You see, but what happened is, it's like the man is suddenly hit with a sledgehammer. Why? Because What is the connection of the neshama? You see, the personality of a person, or the nature of his thinking. What is really the connection? And I've gone over this sometimes, but I want you to grasp this. What does the neshama do for me? What does my neshama contribute to me? You know, if I do or do not have my neshama, what difference really is there in me? I want you to know that without a neshama, you would still live. You would feel, you would think, you would be, you would see, you would have all your faculties without a neshama elyoina. You see, why? Because what determines the fundamental faculties of a person is what's called the nefesh hatachtoina. That's what does it. That's what creates all the various aspects of mind and matter. That's what creates the state called mind, which is embedded in what's called the brain. There's a physical organ of the brain, and then there's something which creates something called mind. Right? What creates this thing called mind is the nefesh hatachtoina. Okay? What is that? The mind is the aspect of intellect. You can think and reason, you can conceive and understand, you can feel, you can sense perceptions, you can will. All these things are a result of the nefesh hatachtoina. What does therefore the neshama do? The presence or absence of the neshama does the following. It's the content of the mind which changes. It's the sensitivity, it's the intuition, you see. For example, you ever notice sometimes two small children, let's say both 3 years old, two small boys, and one of them, I don't mean in terms of intellectual necessarily, but he feels something differently, in that sense. Where is that coming from? You see, in its capacity for ruchnis, that's coming from the neshama. He has built in, one of them, the kid, has a higher neshama than the other. His kochas hanefesh are much more powerful. I once heard the old story of the Ger Rebbe, the Sfas Emes. I once told a story about when he became the Rebbe, the Ger Rebbe very young. His father died, the Chedusha Rebbe, and he became the Rebbe. I think he was a very young person. I think in his teens or 18, 19, so on. And Ger was no Pasha Chasidus. The Ger was very chashuv. The Ger Hasidim were go'inim and so on. So they all sat around and they had a chabur over there. They had a meeting. They said, what's going on over here? We can the Chedusha, the Kotz and so on. What's this over here? Was a Yingach, his son had become our Rebbe. We're in our 60s and 70s. And we're Malumad and Torah and Nomet Tzadikim, and this Yingach comes over. So I think one thing, so they came over to him and they said, so they didn't know what to do. So they said, okay, we're going to test him out. We're going to ask him a certain question. So they all came to him one day. They all sat down, the whole thing, and I don't think he was too intimidated. So the Sfas Emes said, he said, before you ask me a question, let me tell you a story. There was once a situation of a mountain, and what happened is there was a couple of mountain climbers, and they wanted to climb this peak. It was a very difficult peak to traverse. So what they did was they went up, and tremendously, finally, after days of really the most incredible mountain climbing skills, they finally got to the top. When they got to the top, they looked around and they see this small kid standing there, about 14 years old. And they went over and says, how'd you get up here? You have to be an incredible mountain climber to get over here. So he said, what's the matter with you people? I was born here. That's what he told them. That's what someone said. So as soon as I was born here, he answered their question that they were about to ask him. What essentially he was saying is that it took you 50 years to establish what I did in 15. Why? Not because I'm better than you in a Bechiridik standpoint. My neshama, when I was born, was already on a very high madreg in ruchnis. When I was born, when I was a kid, I was already sensitive to very powerful hasogas of ruchnis and feelings of kedusha. I already had, we didn't say it, but he already had the levels of kedusha, which is close to ruach hakodesh already. At a very young age, what you have to work at for 30, 40 years, I was already born with. You see? And that's the concept of content. You know, he is sensitive and he's intuitively aware of ruchnis, or the presence of the Bnei Shalom, or of emes, to a much higher degree than other people right away. What does that? The neshama. The difference in neshamas. Yeah.
When Adam Harish's neshama was shattered, why wasn't the neshama, shattered in a certain manner and in equal parts?
It wasn't shattered in equal parts. It was shattered. So Adam Rishon after the Chet was now only one of its fragments.
Okay, so now all these fragments, there's only X amount of fragments which were going over and over and over again, right?
Yeah.
So why is one segment better than the other one?
That has to do with the construction of the neshama of Adam Rishon. It has to do with the structure of the neshama itself. For example, in the human body. For example, what's more choshev, the heart or the kidney? You know what I mean? Now, why should the heart be more chashuv than the kidney? Because the structure determines its specific, you see, function, its structural function, which is then alive. Then in the neshama of Adam Rishon, in that structure, there were many different chalakim, and different neshamas had different functions relative to the whole. So those, when it's fragmented,
they had the same
it automatically had different koiches. There were other things involved also. It's a very complex thing, b'chlal. But without getting to that, what generally determines the koiches hanefesh of a person is not necessarily the only thing of Adam Rishon. That's one thing. But besides that, what then determines it has to do with the person's ma'asim in the mitzvahs, you know.
But every new goy that is born, whose neshama does he get?
Who?
Every goy, every kid every goyish kid that is born, what neshama does he get? Does he get a neshama which is full of tumor around it, or not?
Yes. He doesn't get that. He gets this. It's not even full of klippus anymore. It's no more musha. It's a very low level. That's what he gets. He gets that.
So for him, it to become.
So this guy who suddenly 5 minutes after was sitting there and thinking, for example, and what happened was his entire being changed. Suddenly, what was important to him before was no longer important. The importance of emes or of truth was not that vital anymore. It was not, suddenly he was, he's saying to himself, I really, the truth of the matter is, as I think of it, he's thinking of some important aspect of life and of what he should be doing, and in terms of his relationship to another person and certain sensitivities to emes, and he's thinking about it, and 5 seconds later, suddenly he says, roughly speaking, truly speaking, I don't give a damn. Now what happened? It wasn't in conclusion. Suddenly, whatever was taken out, so the need and the desire, the importance of that emes plays or ruchnius and these things plays was no more important. He said, I tell you honestly, I would much rather enjoy myself. And now you say, where did you reach this conclusion? So he said, frankly, I really don't know. See, he's not aware of this sudden turn of events. He doesn't know this. But this is what happens. You see, the transformation of one neshama into another does that. I want another example, and then I think we'll take a break after this. When a person becomes a navi, what exactly is a navi? A Nevi Hashem. A navi is an individual who has a very high level of kedusha. What does it mean? He has a neshama which kedusha level, it's such that it's sensitive to certain things that are going on in the shemayim that most neshamas are not. And those things which are going on is called nevius. He's sensitive to certain events and hakoros and asugis that are going on that he sees in a mareh from his neshama. If the neshama is that sensitive to this thing, and he actually feels this kind of thing, that's a madrega of navi. Person who's not a navi doesn't feel this stuff. He has no idea what goes on. He's not in contact with that what's going on there. He lacks. Now, what's the difference between a Navi and a not a Navi? Or what's the difference between someone who's almost about to be a Navi and suddenly becomes a Navi? That point of departure, that juncture point, is that suddenly what happens is when a person does mitzvahs and he's worked and he's over, what happens is all begins to filter down and the nefesh begins to raise. So what happens is suddenly what a person had a neshama before, a high neshama, becomes infused with a higher light and it becomes an even higher neshama. So as soon as it becomes a higher neshama, the person experiences it as a change of consciousness, a change of awareness. He feels differently about the Bria, he knows differently about it. What was doubtful before is certain now. You see, why? He doesn't know. But he knows it. It's definite. You see what I'm saying? That is what it means to be infused with different levels of neshama. Yes.
The way I see it, from what I see what's going on, I see that a Yid will only have this feeling if he's trained and if he learns it. And it doesn't come natural more than it does to a guy. And if a guy will learn it and be trained that way, he'll also have that same feeling. I don't see more by a Yid than by a guy.
Yeah, because they're I know.
You put a goyish kid in a Jewish house, he'll grow up like a Yid.
Yeah. Okay. The truth of the matter is that we can't go into that question, although it's a very critical one. Where does this manifestation actually bury itself in reality? We can't go into that question until we understand the concept of the Yetzer and the Yetzer Tov. That there's a different type. There are different types and the way it functions. But at this point, you must be aware. And there's other points also. We do not know anymore who is a Yid and who is a Goy. That's another thing. There are many things which we do not know anymore, and so on. I'm giving you the simple picture. This picture is what is true. But this picture what I'm giving you is not an explanation of reality as we see it yet. It can't be, because reality is far more complex than that. But this is the beginning of the binyan. This is the first established fact. There are many, many things that are going on. Many other things that are going on. And even in the Goyim themselves, you will see there are other things. We'll get to other things to show. Slowly, in the sequel, we'll be able to answer that question.
Also, another thing you said before about the story with the Ger Rebbe.
Yeah.
You mentioned last time that the schus of the thing that stopped by Avraham Avinu, where the Eibush told him that Ad Khan, there's what's called the Shroshim, the office.
Yes,
told
I didn't go to
doesn't that
that.
stop?
Yes.
Why does it still? According to what you were saying in the story, it seemed that it's still the schus of it still carries now also.
No.
Yes. Yeah. It does. Well, we'll get into the concept of the church again when we get into the next thing. I'll get into that in a second. Okay, we'll get into that again. The truth is, Matan Torah was the last of the Avos. From Adam Rishon to Matan Torah, all the generations of Avos in different degrees. The last of the Avos, or the last of the Shroshim of Matan Torah, and then it ended. The Shroshim.
What does that mean? And that means that no more will a neshama be able to give over its koyach to the descendant.
Yes, right.
So then why?
In that way.
How does that agree with the story?
No, he got a better neshama.
What happened was,
you're saying he didn't get a better neshama because of his father. Just he himself happened to have been given a better neshama.
No, he got a better one because of. Okay, to answer this point, I'll tell you what. We'll establish certain important principles. Let me take a break now. Okay, and I'll come back to this concept of Avos and Tolas. It's goy. We're talking about a goy as a goy. We're not distinguishing it further yet. First, we've got to understand this. However, there's another important point also, just quickly in terms of avoida, and this is very important also. There are two things I want to do, and then we'll kind of finish. This principle here. Let me just establish something here in terms of avoida. Okay, quickly here. I do want to say one thing which is very important. I've said this before, but now you can understand it in a much better way. The concept here, we notice over here that given the kitrig of din, too many klipas lowers the level of culture, so there's a change in substance. The change in substance is constitutes the change in the being of the thing. Its kedusha is different, and that manifests itself as contents of awareness actually become different in terms of the human experience. That changes, okay? In other words, when the person begins to be moisif with tumah, then the Shemayim is moisif in Olav. They give him all the tumah and they lower him. Now, and the same thing over here. Now, the whole thing that I avoid that we once said before, and this is a very critical thing. And this idea is, for some, it's like not even. It's almost lost in Yiddishkeit. It's an incredible thing. It's lost in Yiddishkeit. It's contained. I hate to say this. It's contained in the Orient. It's funny. The mitzvahs, that's what it is. In any case, what the concept is the following: that when we say what is the tachlis of a yid, right? Essentially, the tachlis of a yid is to be this kind of neshama. You see, but when a person is born, he's born with a certain neshama as a yid. Let's say take a Jew who's born. A goy is born starts here now. A Jew was born. This is his kedusha. He starts over here. Okay, he's the neshama level down. He's the neshama 1. Okay. Now, what happens is this. A yid who's ovid is B'kayim mitzvahs, in the sense that he's mizdabik to emes and to ruchnius. What happens is there is a substantial change in his neshama, you see. And there's a substantial change in the neshama itself, so that he becomes much more than he was before. See, people say, what is the tachlis of a yid? They say the tachlis of a yid is the Mekayim b'tayig mitzvahs. That is true. But that is also, it's true, but in a very surface, simplistic way to understand. The emes of tachlis of a yid is to become a different being, is to grow in being. That's the tachlis of a yid. It's not, it does this through the tayag mitzvahs. The tayag mitzvahs are the emtsoyim, are the vehicles or the instrumentation in which a yid grabs these tayag mitzvahs, and this is the mechanism, and in this mechanism, he begins to grow in being. What do I mean being? I don't mean that he becomes fruma, he's mekayim more mitzvahs, he becomes more fafchum, or he's more medagdik. That's how the world looks at it. The world looks at a guy, what is a tzaddik in the world? According to the world, according to everyone, a person who's a Sama Beinani is a guy who does some mitzvahs in Chatoim, It's like a hodgepodge here. A tzaddik is someone who does really all mitzvahs, and he really works on the mitzvahs. He's very firm. He's makbid nod in kudus, and he's this, and he's really medayik and this, that. That's a tzaddik. That's not really what a tzaddik is. Or really a tzaddik is that a tzaddik is a different being than a beinoni. And a kodesh, which is higher than a tzaddik, is a different being than a tzaddik. It's ain't a doim a kodesh to a tzaddik. And ain't a doim a novi to a kodesh. A novi is a higher level neshama. These are different people in being. You see, they're aware of different things. A tzaddik, for example, is aware of a certain aspect of the Bnei Shalom. And we went to a whole shir on Dvekis and the Hakor of the Bnei Shalom. A tzaddik, for example, by Mekayim the mitzvah and so on, establishes through his neshama a certain level of awareness. That awareness depends on how much kedusha he has, and that awareness is directly manifest by his direct awareness of the metzias of the Bnei Shalom itself and the emes which is attached to that. When a person does more and more mitzvahs, and he's over more and more, what happens is, it's not that he does more and more mitzvahs, it's more than just an external, behavioral, performance change. You see, what really happens is, when he's really sincere and it really moves, is that he becomes a different person. The hasoga of a kodesh, of someone who's a very high person, is totally different than our hasoga. His yir shemayim is totally different. He's masik the Bnei Shalom, and he's magish the sees of the Bnei Shalom in a direct, experiential, intuitive fashion. You see, in a very powerful degree, much greater than a tzaddik, which is much greater than a beinoni. You see, so remain that people on the higher levels automatically always think about the Bnei Shalom. Shivisa Hashem Nenegdi Summit. It's not a difficulty for them. It's like it says there, Mo Hashem She'el Mimcha Ki Im Liyura. So Chazal say, Yura is Zuti, what is it? It's like Moshe Rabbeinu said, what does the Bnei Shalom want except to be Yorehim? So Chazal told him, except to be Yoreh. To be a Yura Shemayim is a lach, it's a small thing. So the Gemara says the Gabe Moshe was a small thing. What does it mean the Gabe Moshe was a small thing? Does it mean he was more fafun? He did more mitzvahs? No. His being, the substance of his neshama was much higher than other people. He was masik the Bnei Shalom automatically in ways that other people could not understand. In terms of feeling, you see, what he knew in his hagosha and what he knew in his sensitivity was staggering. What a person could barely begin to know in his intellect, he understood from his being, from his feeling, what most people could not understand in their highest levels of intellect. You see, this is the tachlis of a yid. The tachlis of a yid is to grow in madrega. Yes, it's to grow in the metzias of that person. The neshama changes. More and more errors come down into that neshama. The neshama enlarges and becomes more and more powerful. As it becomes more powerful, then the person is able to be margish more. You see, it's that chain. You see, the person, when he's on a certain level, cannot be margish. A person on, let's say, on a certain level of, let's say, of a yasha. Remember we said there's a yasha, a tzaddik, a chassid, and a kodesh. We once distinguished it. The few yashom to swim in, the sister tzaddikim to sporach. Of the Hasidim, the more kedusha there is, the more hidden it becomes, because the more it manifests itself in terms of being. What a person does in the beginning, he's over mitzvahs. The mitzvahs that he's over, that he does, are performances. That's what they are. They're behavioral. They're overt expressions. He puts on tefillin. He's medaging the mitzvahs. He makes sure that the SUG buys a halacha. These are external things in Tom, basically. But if a person is mushrash in external mitzvahs to a very strong degree, you see, and he's overed in the yir shemayim that accompanies each mitzvah, not just the mitzvah itself, each mitzvah is a keli or vehicle for the yir shemayim that's enveloped in it, and he tries to develop that yir shemayim in it. What happens is, in the beginning it's a struggle. He can't achieve that yir shemayim, he can't achieve that sensitivity or that motive, that drive. You see, on a lower level, he first has to work on the level of behavior, outside of activity. And that's all he has. He doesn't feel it yet. Chazal say the chetzonis is more the pnimius. You see, the outward manifestation, the outward expression of mitzvahs gradually brings a change in pnimius, in inner being. And that's how it is. The person is over it, and he's over it in terms of the yir shemayim behind the mitzvahs, and he doesn't feel anything yet, but he keeps on doing it, and then suddenly something happens. Suddenly, one day he wakes up, and he's a different person. He feels it. He knows it. Why? Because what was an immense struggle from before, what used to be a mitzvah that was relatively empty. You know, we just do it. You know, you perform it, you say the bar, you say the things, and you say it, and you feel happy about it, so on. You suddenly is filled with energy. It's filled with awe. It's filled with awareness. It's filled with a simcha. You see, it's filled with a hasaga. It's filled with an avodah, with a certain aniva, certain hakol of the Baruch Shalom that he never had before. He says, "Hey, wait a minute. I'm doing the same mitzvah, but I feel totally different about this mitzvah. Because I can feel, it's like I'm in tune with this mitzvah now. I can feel the inner mechanism of the mitzvah. I can feel the hagosha behind the mitzvah, the connection of that mitzvah to Yiras Shamayim. You see, where did that come from? It didn't come from the mitzvah itself as such, because the mitzvah in and of itself is only a chetzonistic performance. It doesn't have the capacity to introduce that level of hagosha. What it does, the mitzvah, through that performance, you see, what it does is after a while, it brings down Oris, new kedusha that comes down, new substance, and as that infiltrates his being, suddenly that mitzvah takes on a different dimension, and he moves up in being. He's different, and then continuously he moves up, and he moves up. That is how a tzaddik is born. That's how a tzaddik is grown. Tzaddikim aren't born in some people, like I said before, are born that way. Some people are born at this level. They start doing mitzvahs and they feel that right away. Why do they feel that? There are many reasons for that. I guess it has to do with certain chusim that they have, certain avodas they have in a different time, a different gilgul, or whatever stories. There are many reasons for that. I won't go into that. His shirish, many other things on. He starts there. Everyone starts at a certain given. All of you have technically what's called a specific given level of ruchnius. And we're going to establish a certain profile. You see, where you're holding ruchnius. You see. How does one establish that? You people cannot establish it. You don't know enough information for that. But it is possible to gradually to see into a person and see where he's holding. You see, it is possible to do that. And once you see where you're holding in terms of that, you have to know exactly what are the things you have to do and how are you supposed to do things to begin to, you see, enhance your being. And then you have to work at it a certain amount of time. How much time? It depends on the individual. There are many things, you see. And then gradually a time comes on, let's say, where you're doing certain things, certain kinds of things, you're oisik in, and suddenly you're a different person, you see. And then you go from there, and from there. That's how a tzaddik, that's how a kodesh is made. If you people say, how in heaven's name is it possible to become a kodesh? How can a man get ruach kodesh in this day and age? And I tell you that is extremely difficult, you see. It is extremely difficult for many reasons. However, the mechanism itself is easily understood. It is. The problem today is that this mechanism is no longer understood. It is no longer essentially known, really. It is known in the Hasidic world. In many ways, in the Yeshivish world, is not really known. That kind of mechanism. And that's where the oil is split in a certain way. But in essence, this is what thing. This is the avodah of what a person is. And if a person knew the mahalach of the avodah, he can actually work himself up to a very high madrega. He can. You cannot work yourself up to certain high madregas that are no longer applicable. For example, after the time of the Anshei Knesset Gedolah, Chagas Chayim Malachim was the last of the Nevi'im. And it was no longer, no matter what he says, no matter how much avodah you do, even if after all your avodas you've reached the level where you're already right under a Navi, you've got that neshama, you've got that being, you cannot bring down the kind of substance, the kind of awe which will put you over that into the level of Nevi'us. You see, because the door, many things are no longer zeich to that. The generation cannot take that level of Giloy. There's a certain level of Hester that must exist in that generation, and Nevi'us is not consistent with the tachlis of that generation, and therefore with the tikkunim that's established. That's why you can no longer establish. That's what the Gemara means when it says over there that not for the fact that if the door was Zoicha, Ezra could have been, or Hillel could have been like Moshe or Navi. But the reason why he did not establish Navi is because his door was not Zoicha. It was the door, the generation. The necessary Hester, the door, which did not allow that level of Neshama to come down. But this is the avodah of a Neshama. And it's the avodah of every Yid. And this is the critical thing. If you learn the Ramchal in the Moshe Chaim Tzaddik Mesilas Yesharim, and you understand the Mesilas Yesharim, you would see that the Mesilas Yesharim follows this pattern. This itself, as you can see, is a whole chachma unto itself. Just like there's psychology, theoretical psychology, and applied psychology, theoretical science and applied science, engineering, there's something called theoretical hasagas haTorah, and there's something called avodah haTorah. It itself is a chachma. the way to assess yourself, the way to understand what kinds of things you have to do to raise yourself, the way to understand exactly what types of manias or barriers come in, and how to anticipate the different nature of the Yetzer at different points in time. That itself is a whole chachma. It's like somebody training to be an athlete. Let's say you want to train yourself to be a long distance runner, and you don't start out like that. It's a long way, right? But as you do it, you've got to build up your cardiovascular system, your endurance mechanism, so you're eventually able to establish yourself. The reason why a long distance runner can run 30 miles without a break is not because he has more willpower than somebody else. No, because through exercise and continuous work, knowing exactly how to elevate his being, he's changed his physical condition existentially. When the man starts out in the beginning and he becomes a long-distance runner a year later, he is not the same. His heart and lungs don't look the same anymore. It's a different organ. One is an organ capable of sustaining that kind of endurance, and the other ones are not. He's a different person. His entire inner body looks differently. It responds differently. So automatically he can run the 30 miles without problems. It's the same thing here. But that's a whole avodah. How to become a long-distance runner is a chokhmah. You see, you got to know the kinds of exercises. You have to know how to do it, when to do it, not to overtax yourself. You have to know the different kinds of problems that comes in. It's a whole chachma. To be an erech chayid is a chachma. And the Ramchal says in the Mitzvah Shalom in the Hagdama that this is the biggest of all chachmas. To apply all this to it, to understand the direction or the uplift in the level is a big chachma to itself. Last week we discussed the critical concepts of the Indian of the Ummah Olam, and essentially what we said was that a goy is a ben Olam Hazer, and a Yid is a ben Olam Haba. That's essentially the distinction between the two. We described the events leading up to that distinction. You see, we described exactly how that distinction came about. Another thing we did, we described also the mechanics of that distinction. What is the difference between a goy and a Yid in terms of the pneumius, or the being of both? And I remember we explained last week this whole concept of the different neshamas and the loss from the nefesh, the koyches of kedusha which reside in the nefesh, and so on. And we said that the yesh lahor, the satan relates, the kippur relates to the neshama in two ways. Either it's mizdabek in a klippa, it's mizdabek to it, or else it'll actually withdraw kedusha from it and actually lower the state of being of that neshama. And consequently, that exactly basically is what a goy. It's a much lower state of neshama than the Jew. Another very critical concept to understand is the following: the concept of shroshim and told us. What exactly does it mean by shroshim and told us? It's important to understand the basic idea. To elaborate on the idea extensively is really very difficult, and it's not warranted right now. But when people learn history, generally speaking, they assume, you see, that men or people have generally always been the same. What essentially has changed is man's environment. For example, his chokhmah has changed. His understanding about the world has changed. His ability to control his environment has changed. His adaptational lifestyles have changed. But man himself has always been basically the same. An ancient Egyptian was really basically a similar kind of person, psychologically, intellectually, and so on, as a Roman, and the same kind of person as a medieval Englander, a person who's in England. It was the same as a modern person. There's no real big difference except in the lifestyles and the culture and so on. But essentially the person himself has really not changed. And so therefore, because of this, there's a certain view that we can compare all the peoples from different times. You see, we can look at the biblical figures, or we can look at ancient figures in a similar light that we do modern figures. We can fault them in the same way, we can credit them in the same way, and so on. And this is generally the view. This is definitely the secular view. Now, in the Torah view, it's different. People who go up in Torah understand that there was something different about those people then, which are no longer Torah. The others were different, the Nevi'im were different, and the Tanoim and the Amorim, and they were different kinds of people. They're no longer the same. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, there is no one in the world today who equals Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. There was something about the people of that time which were vastly superior than the people of our time. And what we see from a Torah standpoint is that the abilities or the nature of men has descended, so that man in the modern times is significantly inferior to a person in the biblical times or in the Talmudic times. That's the Jewish point of view. But what does that mean, really? What does it mean? And once we understand what it means, it has tremendous ramifications on the way we have to understand history. Because if the people in biblical times, in Talmudic times, were different than the people today, it means you cannot understand their behavior in terms of the way we would understand the behavior of people today. You can't. It's a different thing. There were different Yesodis, there's different kolam, different koichas to deal with. Obviously, when Avraham Avinu was involved in some kind of nesoyan, if he was only been nesoyan, or let's say, for example, in certain times when he was not, or was the others, or people in biblical times, or the Nevi'im, or Yeshaya did a chet, obviously it is a very different picture than a chet if someone, let's say, in Europe in the 1930s did some kind of a chet, wasn't only been nesoyan. The question is, what really was the difference, and how does that really manifest itself in terms of the different kinds of people? Okay, the answer to that question is a vast question, because it not only involves the people. The truth of the matter is that people have changed in human nature, midorach ador. There is no generation where the people are the same as the one before. They may look the same and this and that, but there are vast changes in every generation from the one before and from the one after, in terms of the types of people which are found and their koichos. The changes not only occur in people, but the changes also have to do with the world itself. Every door has its own klolim, has its own tachlis, and is mishuna, it's different than the generation before. And when we study all history, human history, it's very important to keep that in consideration. This is one of the most fundamental tenets when you study all of Jewish history. And it certainly won't be marked now. But the fundamental concept that really underlies all this is the concept of Sherish and Trilga. And it all starts with Adam Rishon. What happened was, the world started with Adam Rishon. Adam Rishon was the individual in which the tachlis of the Bria should have been fulfilled. He failed. But who was Adam Rishon? Adam Rishon was, of course, like we're saying, was a person with a guf and a neshama inside. That neshama of Adam Rishon, before he did the chet, was extraordinary. Who was that? What was that neshama? That neshama obviously had a very high madrega of kedusha, a lot of kedusha in it. And because it was in such a high madrega of kedusha, Adam Rishon's mind, or the contents of his mind, was vastly superior. His sensitivity to truth, to ruchnius, to the Bonisham, to many things, was extraordinary. It was not that much farther from a malach, although he wasn't a malach really. Now, what kind of neshama Adam Rishon possessed before the chet? I'll tell you. You want to get an idea? Take all the neshamas from the Avos, Avram Yaakov, the Shvatim, Moshe Rabbeinu, all the Nevi'im, all the Tanoim, all the Mavoim, all the Rabbanim Savoy, all the Rishonim, all the Acharonim. Okay? Combine them all. But I haven't stopped there. Take all the neshamas of all the Jews who were ever born. Then take all the neshamas, or the original neshamas of all the people who ever lived. Take all that, fuse it into one neshama. That was Adam Rishon Kodem Achet. Now it's a staggering thing of what kind of person, what could be the nature of that kind of person's thinking in that such an incredible, because like we say, the neshama, what the neshama does, the neshama gives the content of the mind, the sensitivity to certain things, the proclivity or the inclination towards certain things come from the neshama in that way. It's extraordinary. Who was Adam Rishon after the chet? Adam Rishon after the chet was very different. Adam Rishon after the chet was only one piece of that big neshama that he had before the chet. He became only one piece. What happened to the rest of the neshama? It's fragmented. It's split into different pieces. And each of these pieces became a different person. So that What Adam Rishon should have done himself now has to be done by many people. That's the central idea. The central idea is the concept of fragmentation. That if a neshama fails to do what it can do in the time that it's supposed to do it, it then fragments, and the pieces of it, the nitzutim, depending on how it fragments, go on. And those become other individual people, and they have to do what it is. Now, it doesn't mean that these new people who are formed were the same as the old person. It's a different state of consciousness. It's a different being, a different identity. Each one of these people is different. What's split is the neshama. You see, the individual essence of a person, or his self, is the fundamental unit of all beings. Every person is a self. That can never be shared. I can never be you, and you can never be me. You see. Even, for example, if the neshama splits and goes into different people, those different people are different than the one who first possessed the entire totality. They're different people. The consciousness of each individual is always separate. But the kochas hanefesh, you see, can be passed down. Essentially, this is the key concept. What we know is that the neshamas of the people who used to live a long time ago were called shloshim. Why were they called shloshim? Because since they had the collective neshamas prior to fragmentation, what they did influenced, you see, their neshama, and that's when it's later fragmented in some way, it then influences all other individuals. They're called a shloshim. A shurish is an individual. You see, he's an individual whose specific activities are such that they can actually do something to his neshama, and once something is done to that neshama, that person influences the personality or the nature, the pneumius of all those people who will come from him. Or will come from both physically and spiritually. That's called a shurish. Because that person has a collective neshama, just like Adam Rishon. When Adam Rishon did the chet, why is it that his chet influenced all mankind? Why? Why is it that when the Rebbeinu said to Adam that you will have to die, and therefore all men will have to die? The answer is because Adam was all men. So since he was all men, that which applied to him applied to all men. You see, he was therefore the greatest shurish there ever was. He had the kindest neshama, which when he affected it, affected everyone after that. After him, his sons, you see, Cain and Havel had the neshama of Adam split into several parts, and Cain and Havel took on a massive segment of it. You see, a massive segment. So they were huge collective neshamas themselves. And the chet that Cain did affected his neshama. What happened to the neshama of Cain? The neshama of Cain also was split and fragmented. So therefore it became other people after that. But those other people had the koyach hanefesh of Cain. They were really Cain himself in a different state of consciousness. But they had the basic koyach or kedusha or tumah that Cain had. And therefore it was up to those people to work through what Cain failed to do. But Cain was able to affect all these people. Cain was a shurish. All these people were shloshim. And that's what you find. That from Adam Rishon all the way down the Doris, to Dor HaMabul, to Avram, Yitzchak and Yaakov, all the way up to the Shishim Rivoy, the 600,000 Jews who were counted by Matan Torah. All those neshamas are basically called shloshim. Because those neshamas were the complex neshamas, that from them all other peoples evolved. Not only from Jews, but from all the goyim at that time also. You see, all their neshamas. For example, some guy who lived in the time of the Aflaga, he did certain chatoim or certain maisim. The maisim that he did affected his neshama. That neshama then, after it was a judge and so on, the Banisham or the Beit Shemal would say, look, because of the certain chatoim you did, you want to massacre it? You got to go on. It's fragmented now into four of the people, the next generation. You see. So obviously what he does now affects others. It's interesting, there's an old theory in biology of how traits are inherited. And there was an old theory by Lamarck that said that acquired characteristics cannot be inherited. In other words, if a person, let's say for example, you acquire a certain skill, You can't inherit that. You can't inherit that to your son. You know what I mean? If you're a great computer programmer, your son doesn't suddenly grow up and he knows how to do computer programming. You see? Also, even if you affect something physically, let's say you develop a fantastic physique, your son may or may not have fantastic physique. In other words, characteristics which you acquire in life cannot affect your children because they don't affect the genes. You see? However, if you can affect the genes, let's say through chas v'shalom, through certain things, that will affect. You see? But that is true now. What the Torah says is that the Lamarckian theory was once true, but for neshamas. You see, what Adam Rishon did affected everyone else. What did he do? The fact that he did a chet was an acquired thing. It was something that he did in life. So why should that affect his genes? You see, the answer is it did. It had the coil to affect the neshama, and it was able, therefore, to affect the biological train of events. And the same thing with all the people at that time. So all of us people today, the Yidden and all the goyim from all the different ummahs ha'olam, all came from all those collective neshamas that once lived in the time of Avom, Nimrod, Nedor HaFloga, all the different people that you read by Noach. Well, they all died out, but they all those neshamas. Those were the shroshim. You see, they were very powerful collective neshamas that were able to influence through their ma'asim all other people. We are told this. We don't have that anymore. What you do affects you alone. It affects the neshama, but it doesn't have the koyach to affect anyone else, really, in that kind of sense. Now, the key Avos that we're talking about is Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. And why are they called Avos? Most people think Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov are called Avos. They're Avos because we all come from them, physically. But that's not why they're called Avos. The real reason why they're called Avos is because they created the Inyan of a Jew, you see. Because of the nisyonos that they came, they were able to affect their neshama in such a way that they were able to pass down from generation to generation those neshamas which would have the tachlis of Olam Haba, which is the original tachlis of Adam Rishon. That's why they are Avos. They are our shroshim. You see, they did the job, and because they did the job was done. So therefore, it makes it easier for us to do the job. We have to do smaller pieces of it. They laid the foundation. They laid the groundwork. How? Because our neshamas in some way are in some way connected to their neshamas in a certain thing, so that we are affected by their deeds. Simon Abam, right? Ma'aseh Avos Simon Abam. In that way, that's one of the ways to look at it. Therefore, this is the concept called a shurish. When did the era of shroshim stop? By Matan Torah. The Yidden at Matan Torah were the last of the shroshim. You see, from then on they were told us. How many shroshim were there? Every Jew in Matan Torah was a shurish. All of us, every Yid today, and every Jew, from now all the way to Matan Torah, is connected in some way to one Yid at that time.
That's what it says, that everybody was.
That's what it means, everybody was there. The message says that every neshama was there. Of course every neshama was there, but every neshama in some way was connected to all the people there in that time, you see. That's why you are connected to some Yid at that time, whoever that is, and that connection is the koyach nefesh that you now possess. You see, whoever that is. They were the last of the shroshim. So what we have is a very interesting pyramid kind of process, which goes down. You see. Now, this is the critical concept. This concept is such that it answers one thing. For example, a guy may say, look. He comes to you, and this is a very big problem. A guy comes to you and says, look, you're Jewish and I'm a guy. That's what he says. I was born a guy. But the truth of the matter is, you can't blame me for being a guy. My father was a guy. You see, why should I have to be served this Indian here being a guy just because my father was a guy? So the first thing, for example, you say to him, well, you can become a Jew. But that's not the issue here. We don't really care. But the point is, where's the justice here? You see, where's the justice that he is born in a certain position, in a certain spot. That's all. The answer is, he's not born in a certain spot. You see, which is separated from where Shurish is. Because he is part of that church. You see, that guy, 3,000 years ago, who did the chet, is you. You are a piece of that guy. You're not a new guy that has to light you soon because some other guy did a bad job. You mean, it's not like you did a bad job and somebody's got to pay the price. That's not what it is. That's what he's claiming. Why should I pay the price because my Zayda was a Rashab. You see, the answer is all the Goyim, you see, are pieces of their Zaydas.
That is the question to an extent, but to an extent it only begs the question.
Why does it beg the question?
Because there's an underlying ontological basis for it. Doesn't morally or ethically, why that structure is so still doesn't make him chayiv. He didn't ask for that structure to be the case.
That's not
because
point.
he does have individual consciousness, individual identity.
Yeah, but it doesn't matter. The point
and in
is
those terms, to that extent, he's not him. To the extent, in the content, he is.
Yeah.
But in the tzura, he's not.
Yeah, but see, but the tikkunim have nothing to do with consciousness. Tikkun follows in
That's why I beg the questions.
Yeah,
that's
but okay, that's something else.
That's why I beg the question, because even though the tikkunim don't, that's true for the question. And economic, but like.
But in essence, that's what it is. That's why he is where he is, because of what his Zaydas did. That's the whole problem. Are you on a tiny that why should you be shielded for your Zaydas? And so, you are a piece of your Zayda. Your Zayda once, in some way, you are connected to your Zayda. Why should I have to die because Adam Rishon blew it? I mean, let's be honest. We believe the Torah and so on and so forth. Yeah, straight. You say to punish him. What do I have to die for? Because that man didn't know what he was doing. You see, the answer is you were that man. I don't remember being that man. In your consciousness, it's no longer there. But your entire neshama is a chelik of that aspect. You see. And when the neshama is out of the guf, it remembers being part of that man. It doesn't remember while it's in the guf. While it's here, it's like, what do I have to do with Adam Rishon? You know? What? When a person's out of the neshama, then the neshama knows it's shurish. It's a whole different ballgame, you see.
But still doesn't answer the reason, that the Midas Surachman said, let Abraham be the one who is going to be Masakin Namat Chsufa, and therefore the Goyim came about. And it's still, this poor guy, he says, why should I suffer because of that? Because
his Zaydis didn't want the Torah.
Well, the Torah was basically, because Abraham was chosen the one who that his children are going to be the ones who are going to be Masakin.
Why was he chosen?
He chose it.
Because he chose it. The Banishim didn't say, hey, you look like a fine person, come here, I got a job for you. That's not what it was. Avraham said to the Banishim, here's the two. I want this tachlis. I don't want to give up what Adam had. I don't care what all these other guys do. I want this tachlis. And I'm willing to pay the price. I'm willing to be over for it. The Banishim says, yeah? Okay. You got a deal. 10 Nisyonis. The Akkadian sister was the final one. And then after the Akkadian sister, the Banishim says, shake on it. It's yours. But it wasn't a free ride.